What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
The people's car is something that mankind has needed almost always. Ford T and Volkswagen Käfer, Citroën 2CV, and Renault 4, Austin Mini, Fiat 500 and Renault 5. The list goes on for a long time, but in the mid-70s Italy once again needed an even more modern and popular car than the rear. Wheel-drive Fiat 124, which became Giglio after the technical translation, or the front-wheel-drive Fiat 127, which represented the era Golfs before the VW Golf. The car had to be relevant technically, attractive externally, and as affordable as possible. An almost impossible task? Yes. Or almost yes, because people usually meet by their clothes, and on this account Italians had their own proven track, a kind of heavy artillery. Young, but already quite famous and made a name for himself, Giorgetto Giugiaro by that time had managed to do a lot of things, including creation of appearance of one more alternative Golf, Alfa Romeo Alphasud. Moreover, Maestro Giugiaro created not only the exterior of the first-generation VW Scirocco, but also put his hand and pencil to the very first Volkswagen Golf. That's why the Fiat management had no options, only Giugiaro. I designed the Panda as if it were a household appliance like a refrigerator. The concept of technical aesthetics with minimalism in solutions and maximalism in functionality defined the essence of Fiat Panda. Dimensions, like any small car like Soviet Zaporosts, but at the same time the interior space, sufficient for comfortable accommodation of a young family or an elderly couple. Modern appearance, but without French zakadonov not to scare off the older audience by flirting with their children and grandchildren. Adequate behavior on the road, economy, simplicity, and good passability. Are you not tired of hearing incongruous qualities yet? The Maestro was forced in many respects not just to rethink, but even to reinvent a city small car multi-purpose vehicle. The fashion of the time favored simplicity in design. In favor of rationalism, Giugiaro made the car as boxy as possible, i.e. consisting of flat panels joined at almost right angles. And in order not to get a refrigerator, the Maestro turned utilitarian two-door automobile into quite nice and even stylish hatchback. Absence of rear-wheel arches is not a trouble, because many cars of the next decade like the Audi 100 C3 were given the exact same solution. But Giugiaro went even further. Placement of wheels on the corners of the body with maximum increase of wheelbase. This is a simple trick, which was resorted to before the Italian Maestro. But the use of completely flat windows, side windows on the left and right, the same, including the front windshield. Oh, this in the late 70s can be safely called an extraordinary decision. Thus Serial Panda by no means made an impression of some lawnmower with a roof, because the Italian worked out both proportions and detailing to the smallest detail. Even now the Italian small car looks as anything but archaic. And if you consider angularity irrelevant, remember the timeless Gelic and new Suzuki Jimny. The later versions can be easily distinguished by the 4 slash sticks on the radiator grille in 1986. The car was modernized, which also affected the interior. Second photo. Did the Panda look primitive? Not at all. Simple, laconic, but original and memorable image of cosmopolitan automobile, on which both 18-year-old young man and his 70-year-old grandmother could drive equally successfully and effectively. And in this, of course, was the merit of Giugiaro. Panda came out on the roads of the world more than 4 decades ago, in 1980. In the early modifications, the rear suspension had semi-elliptic leaf springs, and under the hood, in addition to the 4-cylinder liquid-cooled engine, you could find a 2-cylinder airbox from the Model 126. You should agree that such a set hardly allowed to consider the contemporaries of the Panda as a particularly modern or technically advanced car. And in vain. After all, in other versions the car received the original dependent suspension of the Omega type, which due to the properties and inherent kinematic elasticity of the support tube provided each rear wheel with a degree of freedom of movement from each other. At that, instead of leaf springs there were springs in suspensions, and traditionally for front-wheel drive hatchbacks McPherson struts were used in front. Fiat Panda was so good from the point of view of technology that it was appreciated not only by buyers, but also by journalists. The car was able to take second place in the competition European Car of 1981, yielding only to Ford Escort. Giugiaro received the Golden Circle Award for this project, repeatedly referring to this car in interviews as his favorite and most charming child. Another technical highlight of the Fiat Panda after modernization is the engine of the F.I.R.E. family, i.e. fully integrated robotized engine. Fiery engine was produced on a fully automated production with hundreds of robots, and the design of the engine was also developed on the computer using the finite element method. Despite the cast iron cylinder block and 5-post crankshaft, the motor with a small center-to-center distance, 77 mm, and no water ducts between the cylinders was very light, only 69 kilograms, because it consisted of only 273 parts, which was about 1/3 less than the analogues of the same working volume. Of course, the valves were located in the head, the timing mechanism was driven by a belt, not a chain, and the inlet and outlet were placed on different sides of the block head, made of aluminum. In the late 80s, the engine received central fuel injection, as well as a catalytic converter, which allowed the engine to meet the current toxicity standards. Even purely externally, the Panda looked more like not our Tavria or some Ford Fiesta, but the Soviet VZ2121 with its short overhangs, vertical side windows walls and stern with almost vertical slope of the third door. In Panda, however, it reached the rear bumper, as on VAZ station wagons, and the lights did not limit the width of the aperture at all. Perhaps, the similarity with all-wheel drive Niva ended there. Exactly until 1983, until the 4x4 version appeared in the range of the Italian small car. At that time, only a few models had all-wheel drive, if, of course, to speak about the permanent, and not connected, this could boast. Only Togliatti all-wheel drive and British Range Rover. The range of part-timers was more extensive, but a compact small car with a pair of driving axles, a phenomenon almost out of the ordinary, with rare exceptions like all-wheel drive Citroën Mahari, which was produced just in the period from 1980 to 1983. Amusingly, the Panda appeared in the first year of the Mahari 4x4's production, and its four-wheel drive version appeared in the last. Most likely, such Panda appeared just because of the fact that in Europe loved Niva, and in spite of this car, Italians in cooperation with the Austrian company Steyerpuck created a version with a connected all-wheel drive. Panda 4x4 was considered by some Europeans as an alternative to the Soviet Niva, although in terms of cross-country ability there was a differential gulf between these cars. It was equipped with a pair of gearboxes and driveshafts, but the rear wheels were driven by the transmission only when the driver forcibly activated them. Features of this version: longitudinal leaf springs and the presence of a vacuum booster in the brakes. However, all-wheel drive Panda in no way can be considered neither analogue of our Niva, nor all-wheel drive Audi of those years, because the Italian car had no interaxle differential, and the drive to the rear wheels was allowed to connect only when off-road and in the speed range up to 40 km/h, mainly when driving in a straight line, because in turns the wheels of the front and rear axles would pass different way. Therefore, from the point of view of transmission, Panda with a certain stretch can be considered as an analogue of Lutsk Volynyanka, which also had a forced connection of the drive of the rear axle. At the end of the 80s in Elabuga, the construction of an automobile giant tractor plant was slowly but obviously dying. Having realized that this enterprise could not be born in the new economic conditions, the Council of Ministers decided to launch an automobile plant in this place, having adopted a relevant decree in July 1988. It provided for the launch of the first production line in 1991, the second in 1993, and the third in 1995. The maximally compressed plan terms were shattered by the new economic realities. There was a catastrophic shortage of foreign currency, so necessary for the purchase of equipment, the support of new projects of. The automotive industry was transferred to self-financing back in 1987, and the USSR government decree on the development of production capacity in 16 related industries remained in coordination forever. In general, already in 1990 the government understood perfectly well that Yellow Z would not be able to pull it off on its own, and that no new Oka would be built new Oka. It would not be possible to produce the car there. Therefore, they began to look for partners abroad in a hurry, for which they held negotiations with representatives of Volkswagen, Suzuki, Mitsubishi, Ford. All of them were ready to supply either finished cars or kits for their assembly, but sharing production secrets or selling equipment was another matter. At that moment the officials remembered Fiat, with which a quarter of a century ago everything not only came together, but also resulted in the construction of a huge city-forming enterprise, feeling relatively well even in the turbulence of the period of glasnost, self-financing and perestroika. At the same time, according to the information leaked to the press, the first stage of production of YLZ envisaged the production of Fiat Panda in Yelabuga. This news caused resonance and a lot of discussions. Some argued that the model is outdated and its release 11 years after the beginning of production in Italy is meaningless. Others, on the contrary, saw in this simple and utilitarian car, if not the Soviet Beetle, then at least the development of the 124 theme, only in a different place and on a front-wheel drive platform. No one saw no competitors to either Samara or Tavria in the Italian car for a simple reason. In the conditions of a long-standing deficit, any car could find its buyer, and the battle for his wallet at that time and in that place would have looked simply ridiculous, because the solvent pent-up demand exceeded the supply many times over. In the second stage in Yelabuga, they were to start production of the A93 model, a self-built model, which later found its embodiment in Berezovsky's project called the All-Russian Automobile Alliance. Indeed, at that time everything was mixed up in the House of Automobile Soviet: horses, people, and pandas. Alas, neither Fiat nor any other car, including the former Opel Kadett with a Daewoo nameplate, was ever smelled in Yelabuga, and their original Kamar tractor plant was eventually transformed into the Yelabuga Free Economic Zone, which then became a licensed assembly plant for Minsk tractor plant tractors, as well as an enterprise producing special machinery and equipment for the oil industry. As we have already recalled in previous sections, the model was offered with gasoline engines, 2-cylinder air and 4-cylinder, 900 cubic inch engine of traditional design. However, in addition to the 50 horsepower 1000 cubic inch 4x4 modification under the hood of the Italian small car, you could find an engine that worked on heavy fuel. The 1.3-litre unit developed 37 horses. However, if you think that this is the end of motor variations, you are deeply mistaken. In 1990, the Italians presented a modification of Panda Elettra. Long before Tesla, compact Fiat was driven not only by gasoline or diesel, but also by electricity. Batteries took the place of the second row of seats, and with curb weight of 1,150 kilograms, the electric motor produced 18 horsepower, but in 1992, the weight of the car was reduced, and the engine power, on the contrary, increased to 24 horsepower. However, really popular electric Panda did not become, because the car turned out to be heavy, not too practical and rather slow. On the saturated German market there was a place not only for Porsche 911, but also for much more practical, utilitarian, and cheap cars, which cost about as much as a set of wheels for Porsche. The Italian hatchback was a very affordable car, although our Giguli were still cheaper. Thus, the cheapest modification of Lada Nova Junior with 1,200 cubic meters engine VAZ2101 and factory designation 21051 was estimated in February 1991 in 8990 Deutschmarks, while Fiat Panda in 10,390 marks. It is interesting that the redesigned Panda under the name seat Mabella cost cheaper, 9675 DM, well, and our Samara with 1.1-litre engine 21,081 started from 10,990 marks. Other cars like the Nissan Micra, the VW-powered Wartburg and the Ford Fiesta were almost 1.5 times more expensive, from 13,450 to 16,390 marks. That is, in Germany, the Panda had only outdated Giguli or Soviet 8, which at that time was neither the last nor the penultimate fashion trend. True, our Samara was potentially higher class, but in practice, many potential buyers preferred a purely Western car. Already in July 1984, the millionth Panda rolled off the assembly line. By the end of 1985, about 1.4 million cars were produced. And by the end of summer 1988, the figure of 2 million PCs was taken. Thus, this Fiat was one of the most mass-produced cars of the brand and class, being produced until 2003. It sounds a bit fantastic, but for 2.5 decades Italians managed to produce and sell 4.5 million cars. That is only a little less than in 18 years in the USSR produced representatives of the very first family, 4.8 million copies. Thus, this Fiat was indeed one of the most mass models of the Italian concern, but it was produced not just for a long time, but for a very long time by world standards. After all, even the 1 and its derivatives in the form of 21011, 21013 modifications were produced in Togliatti for 5 years less. Of course, 6 or 7 were produced at VAZ longer, but by world standards Panda of the first generation can be considered a real long liver. In conclusion, the Fiat Panda stands as a fascinating example of automotive engineering, blending all-wheel drive capabilities, Soviet assembly influences, and the potential of electric motors. While myths often cloud its legacy, the facts reveal a versatile and innovative vehicle that is adapted to the changing landscape of the automotive world. Whether you're drawn to its rugged design or its eco-friendly future, the Fiat Panda continues to capture the imagination of drivers everywhere. Thank you for joining us as we explored the truths behind this iconic car.